All right, guys. Guess I shouldn't have spoken so soon about them giving up on. Shouldn't have spoken too soon about them giving up on Periscope. Maybe they're still monitoring this stuff. Maybe that's what's going on. I canceled because the feed was stuck. I wasn't getting anything apparently. I couldn't see it on my end, but all you guys were telling me that. We'll see if we get the people back. I was revealing maybe too much of the history here, revealing too much of the feed here. Pompeo's last tweet about a map and caps was all deleted. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm on this stuff. We'll find that out. Insurrection Act has been confirmed by so many insiders, and all the evidence suggests that it's been happening. I mean, nobody can explain why all of airspace around DC for like 200 miles was completely shut down, and it was just military aircraft all over the place. No one can explain that. If you put the pieces together, you can read between the lines. But look, I want to get back to this history stuff real quick. I'm going to try to save them for posterity. Maybe when I'm old, I'd like to look at these. It's actually, to be honest, a pretty good documenting of history because I can't be bothered to journal about this stuff. But this is a pretty good documenting of history. So, all right. So let's get back to some of the stuff we were talking about here. All right. The United States has been under attack from the very foundation of this country. It's been under attack. And the first big push, you had all the stuff in the beginning with Hamilton and Adams, who I'm not saying were bad people. I don't believe that they were cabal. Certainly not Adams was not cabal. But New England had bigger economic ties to Britain, and so you could see that there was more infiltration there. You could argue that Robert Morris was engaged with that stuff. I know I've talked about this before. I don't want to go too much into it. Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans were very skeptical, and that's why they became much more of a bigger party. And after the War of 1812, the Federalists collapsed. But the bank, which had been shut down, came back again, and it started to create all sorts of problems all over again. And you had this guy named Biddle, right, who was in charge of the bank. Actually, there's a couple people before him, but Andrew Jackson's big thing. And if you understand why Trump loves Andrew Jackson, and if you understand why the cabal wanted to elevate Hamilton and get rid of Andrew Jackson on the dollar bills, then you understand some of the history of the United States. Because Hamilton was pro the bank, and Andrew Jackson was not. Andrew Jackson literally took a bullet for the bank. Actually, he didn't take a bullet for the bank. That was in a duel. But he got shot. He got fired at. Both guns misfired. I guess he was being protected. But Andrew Jackson, yeah, Broadway made Hamilton seem like a hero. Understand the programming. Okay? I'm not even saying I'm anti-Alexander Hamilton. I would have to do more research to say so. But there's no doubt that he was a disciple of Robert Morris, who was, what these guys would do is it's fractional reserve lending, right? It's the same shit they do today. They'll say, we want to start a bank, okay? Bank of the United States. It'll be good, America's going to have all this money. Okay, so taxpayers need to put up all this money for it. We're gonna start the Bank of the United States. Taxpayers need to put up 20%. Okay, then they lend the 20%, and then they make all this money off of lending the 20%, and then people like Morris and all these investors who put barely anything in, they get all the money that was lent by the taxpayers, and then they get a bigger proportion of the company. Okay, and that's why big banks can get money basically for free, but you have to pay all this interest. It's a criminal enterprise. And that's one of the reasons why when this is all done, you're going to see so much money flood in. That's why, Salmon, you shouldn't worry about your bets, because there's going to be so much money coming in when the cabal's parasitic system is removed officially. And you better bet your ass that's happening. Okay? I was never worried about money in general, but I'm definitely not worried when we have a quantum financial system coming. Yes, the British burnt down the White House too when Madison was president. Jefferson and Madison were not cabal. They were big fighters against the cabal. All right. So let's keep going with this. So Jackson stops the bank. They do everything they possibly can. Jackson fights to the very end, breaks the bank. So then the British Empire basically initiates all the sort of secession issues within the United States. Could have been resolved. The reality is that, the reality is that the South was the number of people in the South who owned slaves was very, very small. Okay. And if you look at the number of people who owned most of the slaves, it was minuscule. You have to look at it as if it was literally like almost like in today's sort of wealth stratification. You had people who owned, you might own one or two slaves if you were a millionaire by today's standards. Okay. And if you were worth 10, 20, 100 million, a billion in relative, aspect, okay, then you might own like a full on plantation. But the number of people who did that were very small. And just to be, vague, they weren't all exactly what you consider the good old boy Southerners. Okay. It was a little bit more muddled than that. Um, so, well, what was the religion of the people owning the slaves, right? Well, it was mixed. Let's put it that way. It was a mixed religion. All religions owned slaves during that time period. So they instigated this war, and what they did is you have Scots Irish, mostly Southerners, people who were very, very independent. You can see it today. Yeah, yeah, a large number of them were Jews. Um, Although, let's again remember that the Khazars, the cabal, infiltrated the Jews. And so I think it would probably be more accurate if we dug into these various individuals. We could see that they were the people who were masquerading as Jews, who are really this sort of Phoenicians, Canaanite Phoenicians, who go back very, very far. Okay. So, um, so yeah, unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of the Jews have been wrapped up in the hate that people have naturally had for these criminals because they infiltrated a group for their own cover. Now, so we have all this stuff happened. Okay, we had all this stuff happened, and um, and so they preyed on the sort of independence of Southerners, right? What is I'm Scottish, and the big thing that we say in the St. Andrew Society is "Nemo me impunere lecessit." Okay, that's Latin for "No one hits me and gets away with it." And in many ways, that is a huge element of the American ethos at this point. I mean, the Scots-Irish American energy of "fuck off," "fuck you," like get away from me, leave me my own place, leave me my own land. It's this sort of, it goes back to the Celts, right? This sort of barbarianism to a certain extent, on its lower end, tribalism, but they were manipulated, and that was the whole thing where you saw the programming for many years in the South was about Southern rights, and it was about states' rights, and it was about states' rights, but that was a manipulation vector. The reality is that most Southerners, they don't really give a, I mean, they were easily programmed against black people because a lot of the whites in the South were poor, and the only thing that they had perhaps was their freedom, and so maybe they didn't want to be put on the same level as blacks. But the fact is that they were propagandized pretty significantly to view aggression from the North. Whereas the reality, of course, is that, and I've studied this a lot because I've been very interested in this counterpoint. But the reality is that you know, most of the North didn't give a fuck about the slaves much either. Everything was instigated. The entire conflict was instigated. I mean, slavery would have died anyway. It was not economically feasible. Consciousness was turned against it, but it became part of a vector about two different cultures and an industrialized North imposing itself on the South. And you better believe that you had the two sides as always. You had the industrialists in the North, many of whom were connected to the cabal, who are pushing for the war. And then you had the plantation owners in the South who were also being pushed towards it. So they learned from the Napoleonic Wars that wars is profitable. And the American Civil War was a very profitable war for the cabal. Made a lot of money off of that. And then America was bankrupted afterwards. Bankrupted and mentally broken. I mean, I keep trying to emphasize this. People don't remember it. People don't get it. Population of the United States was about 30 million during the time of the Civil War. 30 million. Okay, so about less than 10% of what it is today. And more people died in that war than in every other war the United States has fought put together. Put together. If you combine the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq War, Afghanistan, more people still died in the American Civil War. More Americans still died, okay? Between the ages of 20 and 40, 1 out of every 3 men in the South was killed or injured. In the North, 1 out of every 10. It was a slaughter, and it was very profitable for the cabal. The country was broken from this. It was broken on multiple levels because not only was it spiritually broken because of the enormous loss of life, it was the biggest loss of life the world had seen at that point. As far as I'm aware, more people died in the American Civil War than in the Napoleonic Wars. And the Napoleonic French Revolutionary Wars went on for almost 20 years. Okay? Because the American Civil War was relatively industrialized. You started to have all this stuff with the technology. Okay, whatever. I'm not going to get into that stuff. That's a whole rabbit hole. So we have a situation where the country's broken. Okay, it's financially broken. It's divided. And then after Lincoln was assassinated, you had a series of weak presidents. And look, I think Grant was not a bad person, but Grant had no political instincts. He was easily maneuvered. The reason why his cabinet was so corrupt, in my estimation, is not because Grant himself was corrupt, but Grant was just, I don't want to say he's an idiot. It's just, he did not have a political intelligence. Okay, he had no political intelligence. And he was a reluctant president, and he was highly trustworthy. If you understand psychology, he was an ISFJ. Okay, he was not really, he was highly trusting of people, and he was betrayed very often. Wanted to do the right thing, was easily manipulated. Well, the alcoholic part, I've heard some disputes about that. I've heard that was a lot of stuff used against him. He certainly had binges, there's no doubt, but he was not as bad at that point in his life as people try to say about him, from what I've read. Okay. So, but anyway, he Congress, and he agreed to this Incorporation Act. America became a corporation, and for the first time in American history, they got us. They owned us. Okay, so all this stuff, fast forward, Federal Reserve, then we get into World War I, all the financial crisis, the boom and bust, right? Financial crisis after World War I, boom, then bust, Great Depression. It's been on like this forever. It's been going on like this. Okay? Some presidents were good, some were bad during this time period. Some were controlled, some were not. Franklin Roosevelt was 100%. I'm blocking people who are going to say shit like China owns us all. China's not winning. China's fucked. They wanted to own us, but they're not going to. Fuck China. It's not about Chinese people. It's fuck the CCP. Fuck the CCP. They're so scared of us. They would have loved to invade us directly, but they know they can't take us. They know they can't take us. So they had to do this fucking stuff. This infiltration. Which is smart. I don't blame them for that. But Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, not Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt was a Kabbalist, okay? He's a piece of shit. Sorry to tell you guys, he's a piece of shit. Fuck Franklin Roosevelt. Big fucking piece of shit. Can fuck himself. Big psyop presidency. Okay? He brought us completely under the thumb of them. We had already been infiltrated. Our monetary system had already been captured, and he brought us completely under the thumb of them. He integrated us with the British Empire, aka the Rothschild financial empire. Fuck him, and fuck his ugly dyke wife. Fuck those people. I'm serious. Fuck them. Now, Harry Truman was not like that, but Harry Truman, like Grant, was a bit of a patsy. Good old, just a good American citizen. No, I don't have anything against Jews. I don't have anything against Jews. I've tried to be very nuanced about this and understand the infiltration in the Jewish community. There's a lot of Jews who are who have been completely on our side. They understand this stuff. They understand it. I mean, they know it themselves. No, I don't think it was true that Truman was a cross-dresser. That was Hoover who was a cross-dresser. That was the FBI director, Hoover. So, yeah, that was the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who was with, of course, with FDR. Now, Truman had no idea. They threw Truman on because they're like, we need some guy who. I mean, I've read a lot about Truman, and I love Truman. I have to be honest, I love Truman. I don't love him as much as I used to, but I understand Truman's heart. And Truman was a real American. He was an ISTJ, right? He's a real American. Um, again, did not have a high level of political awareness. Okay, grew up on a farm. Just did his duty. He served in. He was a good leader in an artillery corps and during World War I. Very locally minded individual. He got recruited by the mob, by the machine in, I believe it was Kansas City, machine, because he was so honest, and they put him up there as all these sorts of political positions because it made the machine look good, right? I mean, the machine looked good because everyone could trust Truman because Truman would do the right thing. But the problem was that Truman would do the right thing, but Truman was loyal to criminals. So you get this paradox. You have to think in a nuanced level. Truman did the right thing, but he was also very loyal. And so he always had this conflicting dilemma where he wanted to do justice, but he also didn't want to betray his friends. Anyway, they threw him on the ticket in 1944 because they're like, this guy has no mind of his own. He's just very loyal, and he'll do what he's told, and he'll bring in, because the Democratic Party was fracturing, and he'll keep the South in the Democratic Party. And so Truman got thrown in, found out right after Roosevelt was dead about the Manhattan Project, and Truman was basically pushed into thing after thing after thing. And people make fun of Truman. They said, oh, Truman brought all these, idiots from his hometown into his inner circle in Washington, and they were stupid. And you hear this kind of history about him that, Truman brought these dumb people around him, and, just because they were his friends. Well, guess what? Guess what? If you are someone who comes from a small town and has no big political instinct, and you are being thrown around people who are manipulating you, but you don't know how they're manipulating you, guess what you're going to do? You're going to bring in your friends, because even if they have their own little ambitions to make some money with their influence with you, which sucks, of course, that at least they're loyal to you, because you understand that everybody people try to push onto you are trying to manipulate and take things from you. So you're going to take your dumb friend from high school who's only there for you. You're going to take that, okay? People say the same thing about Trump and his family. Like, well, I like Trump, but I just wish he didn't have his family around him. Well, guess what? Guess who's Trump surrounded by? Guess who he's surrounded by? I think that you would feel a lot better to know that you had your family around you, people who you knew you could trust. And frankly, I don't even think his family's that bad. His family's pretty good as far as I'm concerned. But people don't like this person in the family. Oh, it's nepotism. No, it's actually that you need to have someone around you who you can trust. I think Kushner is trustworthy. I think he's trustworthy. I think that his family maybe had some criminal activity in the background, but that they look. There's a bunch of people who have allied with the new forces. You have to think of it like you have light and dark, and then you have all these people who are in the middle, who are doing different things on various levels, and many of them, Elon Musk, for instance, right? Maybe Kanye, they've moved towards the light. Other people have moved towards dark. Okay, but but that's what basically happens, right? As long as they haven't fucked kids, right? As long as you haven't killed people and fucked kids, you're okay, right? There's a lot of opportunity for them to switch sides over the years. The neutral people have been allowed to choose. If you fuck kids and you kill them, you're done. You're out. You're not going to make it. So, Truman said himself, when he talked about the CIA, he basically said he wished that he had never allowed it. He said CIA was America's Gestapo. And Truman wished he had never allowed it. Okay, Truman left office broke and penniless. So Truman was a good American, and he was out of his league, unfortunately. That's the reality. He was out of his league, but he was a good American. I love Truman. I haven't seen anybody tell me anything about Truman that you know. I think that my analysis is correct. He was a good American who was out of his league. Okay. Then we had Eisenhower, who followed him, and Eisenhower was an American hero, and Eisenhower was much more connected. He wasn't a patsy like Truman. He tried to do the right thing. He got bypassed by Majestic 12, right? He got bypassed by Majestic 12. They made a deal with the Greys, the Orion Collective versus the Pleiadians, and that's why Eisenhower gave his famous speech about the military-industrial complex, right? So, um, then you have Kennedy, and Kennedy was supposed to be cabal. His father had made a lot of deals with the mafia, but Kennedy and his brother Robert, I'm not speaking to Ted, who I don't think was good. I don't think Ted Kennedy was a good person. But him and his brother Robert, at least, were of the light. And because you look at the Kennedy family, you can see that different branches have split over time, right? Different branches have split over time. So you had Kennedy, and Kennedy kind of tricked them because they stole the election for Kennedy. You gotta love this. The journos saying, well, they're saying this is the only time that this data didn't, like, the data hasn't looked this ridiculous since Kennedy's election. They're like, so what are you trying to say, that election was stolen? It's like, yeah, it was obviously stolen. We all knew it. Nixon was the cabal's candidate. Nixon, I'm going to talk about Jimmy Carter when I get to him chronologically. Nixon was the cabal's chosen candidate. But he backed down. Remember, he backed down because they thought JFK, he understood that the cabal told him, hey, we'll get you later, but this guy's connections are bigger than yours right now, and so we're giving it to him. Okay? And so that's why Nixon didn't contest it. I'm going to talk about Nixon and what happened with that. Okay? And so Kennedy gets into power. Kennedy understands what's going on, playing a deep game, and he tells them to their face, basically, fuck you, I'm taking you down, you guys are pieces of shit. They weren't expecting that. They didn't like that. They didn't like that for a lot of reasons, because obviously it was bad for their plans in Vietnam and in Cuba, but it was very, very bad. But it was very, very bad because you had a situation where how do I put this? They did not they did not. I'm sorry, I'm getting messages for dinner. I gotta try to wrap it up as fast as I can. They did not want they so they had expended numerous resources to put Kennedy into power. Okay, that's it. They put numerous resources to put Kennedy in the power. They stole the election for him because they thought because his father was involved with the mob that he was going to go along with it, and he didn't do it. So he was not only going directly against them, which they're not used to, but he was also someone that they had paid to put in. So you have like on two different levels. It's like they felt betrayed and he was an aggressive enemy. So they killed him, right? They killed him in front of everybody. And after that, we had super scum of the earth, piece of shit, fucker, Lyndon B. Johnson. And, I want to make this point here that they completely, mafia was involved with the cabal, yes. I want to make this point here that they, they used all of this stuff with Kennedy, and then they killed MLK. They fucked over the black community because the black community was waking up, and they hijacked them again, and they passed all these things under Johnson, which recaptured the black community into a victim state, crushed their standard of living. I hope many black people listening to this understand their history. You guys got fucked by the same people that have been fucking us, but they fucked you over more because they think of you as less human. They think of you as worse. Okay? They do. The cabal has treated you guys like you are worthless trash. And they have done this. You are always expendable. They are always using you. They have used you worse than any other group in society. We have all been used, but they have used the black community worse than any other group in this entire. And that's the tragic thing about the brainwashing. Martin Luther King was a Republican. Martin Luther King was on his way to D.C. to protest what they were doing when they killed him. And Malcolm X knew that, which is why they killed him. Right? And then they created groups like the Black Panthers, CIA groups, right? Which would create violence and destroyed the black community and create all these race riots, which then destroyed black prosperity, destroyed all the places that blacks lived, destroyed, further deindustrialization. And that was it. Look, if you guys want to tell Hotep Jesus, I'm happy to go on with him. I love the guy. I love what he does. But we all know this stuff. We all know it's true. So to wrap up this section, okay, because I'm not going to go past Nixon, but I want to get to Nixon. So we had Johnson, who's a piece of shit. And then Johnson was under a lot of pressure, and they said, you know what? Our good old guy, Nixon, who we stole it from before, he's been good to us, so we're going to give it to him now. And so that's what they did. And they gave Nixon the presidency. But here's what happened. Okay, here's what happened. Nixon was involved with the war. But as Nixon became more briefed with what was going on, Nixon began to understand the degree to which he was controlled. Okay? Understand that up until recently, a lot of these people who became presidents still thought that they had the power. They still thought that they had the power. Everything was being very subtle. And so when Nixon became, Nixon was like, oh, I have these backers, but I'm still president. He became president, he began to understand that actually those around him were not very good and that what they really wanted for the country. And Nixon did not want that. And so what Nixon did is he began to push back against them internally. He began to try to make this plan to try to break away from the cabal. And that's when we had everything with Watergate. That's when we had everything released. Remember, Oliver Stone, yeah, was CIA. Okay, so Nixon was thrown under the bus. Okay, he was thrown under the bus. Yeah, I think that Nixon was compromised. I will agree with that. I'm not going to dispute that he was compromised, but Nixon did try to break away from the cabal. He did. There's no doubt he tried to break away from the cabal. And they basically said, okay, we'll show you how it's done. We'll take you down completely. And they did that. Oliver North, thank you. I think it's Oliver North. Yeah, Oliver North. Yeah. So, guys, we're going to end our history there, but just to let you guys know, we'll continue with the others later. Just to let you know, though, we are in game time, and, well, look, I didn't mention this. This is declassified information, Operation Mockingbird. The CIA was going to plant stories in the media to further their agenda. But at this point, the entire media is controlled by the CIA. You have all these different 6 or so corporations, conglomerates, which control the entire media in the world. Okay? And they tell you what comes out. And they're controlled by intelligence agencies. That's it. It's completely fake. Completely fake. China and CIA. Last little thing I'm going to talk about here. Pompeo just tweeted about declassification. I got to check this stuff out. The last stuff here. China is the new bastion of the cabal. Okay? And the reason it's a new bastion of the cabal is because China is already a communist state. Okay? It has complete control of their population. The government there is willing to do everything the cabal wants. And so the cabal has been trying to move their resources from America to China, just like in the early 20th century, they moved their resources from Europe to America. Remember after World War II that America had control over 1/3 of the world's GDP. 1/3 after World War II. Europe collapsed, and it all moved to America. And they milked America, and now they're moving to China. They're trying to move to China. And they're trying to deindustrialize America. Okay? So that's all been the plan right now for them. It's not going to work because we have President Trump. And we have the United States military, which knows what's going on. And they've declared the Insurrection Act, and they're taking these fuckers down. We're taking these fuckers down. You understand that? We're taking these fuckers down. This scum. And we're going to watch them hang. We're going to watch them hang. We're going to watch them get shot. We're going to watch their confessions. These fuckers are done. They're getting removed from our planet. Fuck them. God bless America. God bless this planet. I'll see you guys tomorrow.